Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 1 of Odyssey Recaps Below the Surface Edition. Just a reminder that if you'd like a shorter, shallower, and slightly sassier recap, head on over to my Just the Tea recaps. But for now, let's dive in. So, Book 1, or Chapter 1, is titled by Emily Wilson as The Boy and the Goddess, and it opens in the traditional way with an appeal to the Muses. This was a very common way to start a story in ancient Greek literature and was a way for the tale teller or song stitcher or rhapsode to ask for a little extra help from the Muses to tell the story in the best way. This particular opening stanza gives us a rough outline of what the story is about and what we can expect to hear in the rest of the poem. It's a nice little orientation for the listener. So to start, I'm going to read the first stanza in this initial invocation of the Muses because it's really beautiful and also sets the scene perfectly. It reads, "Tell me about a complicated man. Muse, tell me how he wandered and was lost when he had wrecked the holy town of Troy, and where he went and who he met, the pain he suffered on the sea, and how he worked to save his life and bring his men back home. He failed, and for their own mistakes they died. They ate the sun god's cattle, and the god kept them from home. Now, goddess, child of Zeus, tell the old story for our modern times. Find the beginning." Isn't that fantastic? I just love it so much. There are a few interesting points here that I'd like to quickly talk about. So, first of all, it might seem unusual to us modern audiences to tell so much of the plot up front. Right from the beginning, we are told that Odysseus, the complicated man, ultimately fails to bring his men back home, and it even tells us why. They ate the sun god's cattle, and the god kept them from returning home as punishment. But consider that an ancient Greek audience would most likely have been very familiar with this story. It's not so much the content that's new, but how each different poet would tell it. Also, telling us up front that the men all died allows the audience to have a sense of fate and doom. We know from the very beginning that these men won't make it home, so when we get to the parts describing them and their struggles, we, like the fates themselves, already know how this story ends. And finally, I'd like to focus on that very first line, "Tell me about a complicated man." Odysseus, like the poem itself, is indeed complicated. He is not necessarily what modern audiences would call a hero. Arguably, he is closer to an anti-hero by modern standards. But complication and multiplicity are key themes in this poem, as are personal transformations and the ways in which one person can be many things. In her introduction, Emily Wilson lists all the many, often conflicting labels Odysseus carries. To quote her, "Odysseus is a migrant, but he is also a political and military leader, a strategist, a poet, a loving husband and father, an adulterer, a homeless person, an athlete, a disabled cripple, a soldier with a traumatic past, a pirate thief and liar, a fugitive, a colonial invader, a homeowner, a sailor, a construction worker, a mass murderer, and a war hero." And he is all of these things and more. We can't label him as simply good or bad because, like most humans, he is a mix of many things, and his life, his morality, and his very identity is, above all, complicated. After the invocation to the Muses in the opening stanza, the poet goes on to tell us that after the Trojan War, the rest of the surviving Greek warriors had all sailed safely home, except for Odysseus. Now, just some very quick background to the war. The Trojan War was a massive expedition where a uniting force of Greek nations and warriors besieged a city called Troy. The war started when a Trojan prince, Paris, possibly aided by a goddess or two, kidnapped or seduced the mortal daughter of Zeus, Helen, who is the queen of Sparta, wife of the king of Sparta, Menelaus. Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, launched a giant expedition to get her back, which eventually led to the fall of Troy, mass looting by the Greeks, and the slaughter and enslavement of its citizens. When the Greek forces were set to depart from Troy to return home, some of them did not complete the correct sacrifices to the gods, and in punishment, they suffered many roadblocks and setbacks on their journey home. But none more so than Odysseus, who, for reasons that we will discuss throughout this story, faced additional punishment and was kept from home for another 10 years, leading to an absence of 20 or so years by the time our story begins. The poet tells us that Odysseus is currently stranded on a beautiful magical island, trapped by a gorgeous goddess named Calypso, in a bid to Stockholm syndrome him into falling in love with her and staying forever as her husband. Most of the gods of Mount Olympus pity Odysseus in his situation, except for Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes, who is very angry at Odysseus. So back to the poem, we cut to Mount Olympus, where all the gods except Poseidon, who is at a feast in Ethiopia getting that injera bread, are gathered. Zeus, the king of the gods, is complaining about the mortals and how they blame all their suffering on the gods when the gods do their best to help them, using the story of Aegisthus as an example. Side note, if you want me to go into more detail on these side characters and mythic mentions like this, just let me know in the comments. In the interest of brevity, I'm only talking about things specifically relevant to this story, but I'm more than happy to do a deeper dive if requested. So Athena, Zeus's daughter and the goddess of wisdom and warfare, tells him yes, Aegisthus deserves his fate, but Odysseus does not. She reminds Zeus of the excellent sacrifices Odysseus has made to help him in the past, and says his imprisonment by Calypso is unfair and plunging him into grief and despair, and that all he wants is to go back home to Ithaca and his family. Zeus agrees with Athena that Odysseus is wonderful, but there's nothing he can do to help him while Poseidon is so mad at him. He reminds Athena that Odysseus blinded Poseidon's Cyclops son Polyphemus, but Zeus agrees that Odysseus has been punished for long enough and they must do something to free him. Now, Athena already has a plan. First, she wants to send Hermes, the messenger god, to tell Calypso that the Olympian gods decree that it's time to let Odysseus go. Meanwhile, she, Athena, will go to Ithaca and try to help Odysseus' son Telemachus kick out the suitors who have infested his home in the hopes of marrying his mother, Odysseus' wife, Penelope. She will also send Telemachus on a journey to gain both news of his missing father and a noble reputation for himself, as well as some much-needed self-confidence. Before Zeus can say no, Athena leaves Olympus and flies down to Ithaca, where she takes the form of Mentes, a guest friend of Odysseus. Now, two very quick notes here. Guest friendship, or xenia, is an important aspect of ancient Greek society and is very important in the Odyssey. Very briefly, elite families were expected to welcome other elite guests and strangers into their homes, to feed and house them, and in some instances clothe them, and send them on their way, ready for the next stage of their journey. There was also expectations for the guests, who were to behave themselves, not overstay their welcome, or unnecessarily burden their hosts. Failing to uphold either side of the guest-host bargain would greatly anger Zeus, who protects strangers and travelers, and risk his wrath. If someone had come and stayed in the past, a guest-friend bond was created, and they would be welcome again. So the form Athena takes is someone who was a guest friend of Odysseus, someone who Telemachus could presumably trust. My second note is on shape-shifting. The gods in general, but Athena in particular, change shape and identity when it suits their purposes. It can be to protect mortals from the overwhelming reality of the true appearance of the gods, or to help them achieve certain goals. Athena changes shape and identity a lot in the Odyssey, so just keep that in mind. I'm going to try to keep everything straight, but just keep in mind, she changes identity. So Athena, in the form of Mentes, enters Odysseus' court. She finds a horrifying situation. Suitors have descended to court Odysseus' wife, Penelope. And like a horde of locusts, they are quite literally eating Odysseus and his family out of house and home. They have been there for over 4 years, trying to convince Penelope to accept that Odysseus is dead and remarry one of them. During this time, they have broken several of the sacred rules of guest friendship and are straining the resources of the house to its breaking point. Throughout the poem, the suitors discuss various outcomes of their occupation and hoped for eventual conquest of Odysseus' home. Sometimes they say they will divide up the wealth between them and leave Telemachus with nothing, and sometimes they seem to imply that one of them will take the throne for himself. It's constantly shifting, leaving Penelope and Telemachus on unstable and highly dangerous ground. The sections describing Athena's first impressions of the house are very interesting. We see the gluttony and idleness of the suitors contrasted against the industriousness of the household slaves, staff, and family members. It is made clear that this is a well-run household, which we can see as implying a well-run kingdom. Odysseus' son, Telemachus, an infant when he left, and now aged around 20 years old, is sitting on his own, imagining his father coming home, regaining control of the palace, expelling the suitors, and setting everything right. He sees Athena as Mentes come in, and immediately runs to greet her properly and welcome her to the house. He may be powerless in his home, but he is still clearly doing his best to be a good host. Once Telemachus has made sure Athena has been fed, watered, and taken care of, he apologizes for the rude behavior of the suitors, and explains that if his father were to return, the suitors would pray for faster feet instead of wealth, gold, and fancy clothes. He then asks her how she came here, and if she knew his father. Athena tells Telemachus that she is certain his father is not yet dead, and that the wide sea keeps him trapped upon some island, and that the gods have given her a prophecy that he will come home soon. She tells Telemachus that Odysseus is resourceful, and that even if chains of iron hold him fast, he will find some way of getting home. She tells him that she knows Odysseus well, and that Telemachus looks like his father. Telemachus responds by saying that his mother says he is Odysseus' son, but I wish I were the son of someone lucky, who could grow old at home with all his wealth. Athena asks him who the suitors are, and I'm going to read Telemachus' response, just part of it here, because it's beautiful. So what he says is, there was once a time when this house here was doing well, our future bright, when he was still at home. But now the gods have changed their plans and cursed us, and cast my father into utter darkness. If he had died, it would not be this bad. If he had fallen with his friends at Troy or in his loved one's arms, when he had wound the threads of war to end. The Greeks would have built a tomb for him. He would have won fame for his son. But now the winds have seized him, and he is nameless and unknown. He left nothing but tears for me. Isn't that sad? He goes on to tell her that the suitors are all lords from the surrounding islands and Ithaca itself, all come to court his mother. But in doing so, they are laying waste to his house, and he thinks that soon they're going to murder him. This really encapsulates just how dire things are for Telemachus and his mother Penelope. They're stuck in a perpetual limbo, waiting for someone they know is most likely dead, but because they aren't certain, they can't begin to grieve and move forward. Everything is frozen. Meanwhile, the locust-like suitors are slowly eating away at them. There isn't a clear way out for any of them, but especially for Telemachus, who is nothing but an obstacle for these increasingly impatient and violent men. Athena is outraged on his behalf and tells him that if Odysseus was here, he would definitely expel the suitors, but that Telemachus needs to start thinking how he's going to get rid of the suitors himself. She basically gives him a wake-up call and a pep talk all in one, telling him that he needs to explicitly tell the suitors to get out. Then she suggests he take a ship and go look for word of his father with some of the Greeks who fought with him in Troy. If he hears that Odysseus is dead, he can hold a funeral and marry his mother off and begin his own life. But if he thinks Odysseus is indeed still alive, he should wait 1 more year to give him time to come home. She tells him to consider deeply how you might be able to kill the suitors in your halls, by tricks or openly. You must not stick to childhood. You are no longer just a little boy. And she says she can see how big and tall you are, be brave, and win yourself a lasting name. She basically shakes him out of his frozen limbo and tells him that he needs to take control of his fate, that he can do it, and that he doesn't need to simply wait for his father to return or to die. She then says she has to leave, but tells him to heed her words. Then she flies away in front of him so that Telemachus knows she is a god and to take her message seriously. Telemachus goes to confront the suitors, but he is interrupted by his mother, Penelope, who has come downstairs to ask the men that the suitors have forced to sing for them to stop singing songs about Odysseus because it breaks her heart from grief. She says she misses him all the time and can't bear to hear songs about him. Telemachus, fresh from Athena's pep talk, tells her to let them sing and go back to her room. He, as master of the house, will deal with the men downstairs. She heads back upstairs to cry herself to sleep over Odysseus. This section to me is intended to show that, 1, Penelope is still completely grief-stricken over Odysseus and doesn't want to move on and remarry, primarily because she still loves him and is loyal to him. In many ways, things would be a lot safer and easier for her if she did just pick one of the suitors to marry, but she truly loves her husband and is still waiting for him. This exchange also shows us that Telemachus really has taken his talk with Athena to heart. He is finally beginning to claim his role as master of the house and is no longer willing to sit back and daydream about his father coming home. He has moved from being frozen in limbo to being a man of agency and action. Immediately after Penelope leaves, the suitors talk about how much they wish they were going to bed with her, which is obviously gross and disrespectful to her, Odysseus, and Telemachus. But this time, Telemachus isn't having it. He says they can enjoy the music and dancing for the rest of the night, but he'll speak to them more at dawn in the square, because they have to leave, to go home and stop eating him out of house and home, and that he will call upon Zeus to punish him. The suitors are shocked, but one, named Antinos, tells Telemachus that he hopes he never gets to inherit the throne and claim his birthright to become king of Ithaca. Telemachus fires back that he may never be king of Ithaca, but he will at least be the lord of his own house and slaves. Another suitor asks who the visitor was and if they had news of his father, and Telemachus tells him, "My father is not ever coming home. I do not listen now to any gossip or forecast from the psychics whom my mother invited to visit us," and shuts down the conversation, though, in his mind, he knew she was a god. They finish out the night and Telemachus goes to bed, planning the journey Athena has laid out for him. And that's where our chapter ends. Now, you may have noticed that we haven't yet met Odysseus himself, and for the first 4 chapters, or books, we won't. These opening 4 chapters are often called the Telemachi and focus on Odysseus' son, Telemachus. Don't worry though, we will get to Odysseus, and in the meantime, we get a very good idea of just how much this man has missed and how big a hole his absence has left in their lives. Grief and yearning are two of the biggest reoccurring themes in this book, and I think these opening 4 chapters really cement that for the reader or listener. But that's everything for today, so tune in next time to see what happens next.